The silence was a living thing. It crawled down the hallway, slipping in under the door before my parents did. I was sitting on the edge of the couch, a frozen shadow of myself, with one hand trembling against the side of my face. The bruise under my eye had started to bloom, an angry smear of purple and red against skin that barely felt like mine anymore. My breathing was shallow, not because of the pain, but because I knew they would see it. And they did. The door creaked, opened slowly. My mother stepped in first, Joanne, always the softer one. Her eyes swept the room and landed on me. They didn't move again. My father, Thomas, followed behind her, and though he'd always been the stronger one, the protector, something in his shoulders had slumped. His mouth opened a fraction as if to say something, but no words came. They both stood there like ghosts, as if they had walked into the wrong home or the wrong reality. No one said a word. Brandon leaned back in the armchair beside me, legs crossed like a king in his palace, sipping from a bottle of warm beer, the label half peeled by his twitching thumb. He didn't even look at me. His eyes went straight to them, and a smirk spread across his face. He raised his bottle like a toast. "Welcome, dear guests," he said. His voice echoed against the walls, thick with sarcasm and victory. I didn't move. I couldn't. My hands were clasped tightly in my lap, fingers digging into the fabric of my jeans, and I kept my eyes on the floor, too ashamed to meet theirs. I had imagined this moment for weeks, how they'd come in, rush to me, pull me into their arms and say, "Enough!" But instead there was just air, cold, still, and full of absence. Joanne's lips were pressed into a thin line, the kind that held back everything. Anger, heartbreak, helplessness. Thomas avoided my face completely, his gaze darting to the furniture, the floor, the peeling paint by the baseboards, anywhere but the bruise. I wanted to tell them it was okay, that I was fine, that I didn't need them to fight for me, but that would have been a lie. Brandon shifted in his seat. "Looks like we're all one big happy family," he drawled, his tone laced with something venomous. His fingers drummed lightly against the beer bottle. He didn't need to raise his voice to assert control. His presence alone was enough to fill every corner of the room with a thick, choking fog. My stomach curled inward. My voice had withered somewhere, deep in my chest. Then, just as suddenly as they had come, my parents turned around. Joanne gave me one last look, half a breath caught in her throat, and Thomas placed a hand on her back, guiding her silently toward the door. Their footsteps faded down the hallway like ghosts exiting a scene they couldn't bear to confront. Brandon let out a low, satisfied chuckle. "See," he said, his voice smooth as glass. "Even your precious parents know when to shut up." I didn't reply. The tears I had been holding back finally spilled over, hot and slow. They didn't burn from pain, not anymore. They burned from shame and something else I couldn't name yet. Something deeper, something stirring. My parents had seen me and left, just like that. As the door clicked shut, I felt something inside me split. Not loudly, not in anger, but in exhaustion. I wasn't surprised, but I was broken in a new way. I sat still in the silence, no longer hoping anyone would come to save me. Brandon turned up the volume on the TV, flipping through channels without watching anything. I stayed where I was, staring blankly at the floor. The walls felt smaller than ever. The lights overhead flickered once and returned to a steady glow. Somewhere outside, rain had begun to fall against the window, but even that sound felt too far away to reach me. I was alone, and yet I wasn't. Not entirely. Something had changed. I didn't know what it was yet, but the silence my parents left behind wasn't empty anymore. It was holding its breath. I don't remember how long I sat there after they left. Time became a blur, a flickering haze of silence and the dull hum of the television. The bruise on my cheek throbbed dully, but it was nothing compared to the ache in my chest, the kind that comes when your last line of defense simply walks away. I was still frozen when the lock clicked again. It startled me, sharp and sudden, like a gunshot in a quiet room. Brandon didn't even turn his head. He remained sprawled on the couch, beer in hand, one leg slung over the armrest like he owned the place, and me. I heard my name through the crack of the door. Elise! My mother's voice was barely more than a breath. I stood up as if in a trance, legs stiff and cold. The door creaked open, and there they were again, Joanne and Thomas, framed in the doorway like statues that had wandered back by mistake. My mother held a small grocery bag to her chest, like a peace offering, her hands trembling. My father's jaw was clenched tight, his eyes shadowed. He looked older somehow, smaller. They stepped inside, cautious, like they were afraid that one wrong movement might set off a landmine. I watched them carefully, not because I feared them, but because I was afraid to hope. Afraid that maybe this time they would do something. Brandon chuckled low in his throat. "Back so soon?" he asked, rising to lean against the kitchen doorframe. "Come to join the tea party?" His smile was crooked and smug, but his eyes glittered with something darker. Ownership, amusement, contempt. He was savoring their discomfort. No one responded. My mother moved past him, keeping her gaze down, and headed to the kitchen. She set the kettle on the stove with shaking hands, her fingers fumbling for the switch. The sound of water filling the kettle was louder than it should have been. I watched her in silence, and it broke my heart. Thomas remained in the hallway, hovering near the entrance, like he couldn't bring himself to cross fully into this new reality. His presence felt half-formed, a shadow of the man who once lifted me onto his shoulders during county fairs and whispered bedtime stories about stars. "I'll put the kettle on," Joanne murmured, her voice so quiet I almost missed it. She busied herself with mismatched teacups, placing them gently on the table like they were symbols of order in a collapsing world. But no one reached for them. The tea steamed silently, untouched, as if even it refused to acknowledge what was happening in this house. Brandon remained in the doorway, arms crossed, watching us like a predator assessing its territory. His eyes swept over my mother, then to my father, and finally rested on me. "You've got quite the audience tonight," he said under his breath, just loud enough for me to hear. I said nothing. I kept my hands folded tightly in my lap, afraid they might shake if I let them go. The room felt like it was spinning in slow motion, Sakan stretching like taffy, too long, too quiet, too cruel. My father cleared his throat awkwardly. "How's work?" he asked, his voice brittle and forced, like a man reading a script that didn't fit the scene. I didn't know what to say. "It's fine," I whispered, even though it wasn't. Even though I had called in sick twice this week, just to avoid walking into the office with another excuse. Thomas nodded stiffly. "And Brandon? How's he been treating you?" he added, not looking up. The silence between his question and my answer was heavier than the walls. "Everything's fine," I said, my voice a hollow echo. Brandon snorted. "Couldn't be better," he added with mock cheer. His voice laced the air with venom, daring anyone to contradict him. Joanne's eyes flickered up then, briefly but with fire, a flicker of something fierce. But she bit her lip and turned away, afraid, perhaps, of what that spark might cost us all. The kettle began to gurgle, a soft, domestic sound that clashed violently with the tension pressing down on us, like storm clouds. Still, no one touched the cups. We sat there like actors in a play none of us had agreed to perform in. The table between us felt like a ravine we couldn't cross. I wanted to scream, to beg them to see me, but I said nothing, because silence had become my second skin, and fear was its twin. Brandon stretched lazily, letting out a fake yawn. "This was fun," he muttered. "Let's do it again sometime." My parents didn't respond. They just stared at their tea, and at everything but me. And in that moment, surrounded by hot drinks no one wanted and love that had forgotten how to speak, I realized something chilling. They weren't just afraid of him. They were afraid of what would happen if they actually acknowledged the truth. They didn't stay long. Maybe 15 minutes, maybe 20, I couldn't tell anymore. Time inside that apartment had its own strange rhythm. Everything either moved too fast or not at all. When my parents stood up to leave, There was no drama. No final words. Just the scraping of the chair against the tile and the sound of my father clearing his throat. Joanne lingered for a moment. Her eyes met mine, not fully, not bravely, but enough to make something twist in my chest. Then she stepped forward and pulled me into a quick, trembling hug. "Stay strong, my darling," she whispered, her voice fraying at the edges. I felt her breath catch against my hair. She let go quickly, as if afraid that if she held on longer, something inside her would snap. Thomas offered a small nod. That was all. They left. And this time, they didn't come back right away. The door closed. The lock clicked. And Brandon chuckled again, standing now in the kitchen, one hand resting lazily on the fridge door. "That's that," he said. "Even your folks know how to keep their mouths shut. I told you, nobody wants you." He said it with such confidence, such satisfaction, that for a second, I believed him. But only for a second. He turned away and wandered back to the couch, flipping through TV channels like nothing had happened. As if my bruise wasn't real. As if my parents hadn't just walked into this theater of cruelty and chosen to play the extras with no lines. I stared at the closed door, and something inside me began to bend, not break but shift. Meanwhile, just a few blocks away, the silence inside my parents' car was unbearable. Rain streaked across the windshield like veins on glass, and the wipers moved in slow, anxious sweeps. Joanne sat in the passenger seat, her hands curled into fists in her lap. Her shoulders shook, not violently, not loudly, but enough for Thomas to notice. He didn't speak right away. His knuckles tightened around the steering wheel, the leather creaking slightly under the pressure. The dashboard lights cast a faint orange glow on his face, making the lines around his mouth look deeper, heavier. Finally, Joanne reached into her purse with fingers that trembled and pulled out her phone. She opened the gallery. There were photos. She had taken them secretly while Brandon wasn't looking. A picture of my face, tilted toward the kitchen light, the bruise swollen and raw. Another of my wrist, marked by the shadows of fingers that gripped too hard. One of the hallway mirror where a hairline crack spread outward like a web, a silent witness to a recent outburst. Joanne turned the phone toward Thomas, her voice barely holding itself together. "Look," she said. "Look what he's done to her, and we just sat there." Thomas didn't take the phone. Not right away. When he finally did glance at it, his jaw locked tight, and he turned away again. "We should have done something long ago," he said quietly. "Long ago." The words sounded like they weighed 1,000 pounds. They sat there for another moment, the rain tapping softly above them. Then Thomas started the car and turned toward the east side of town, toward Nathan's apartment. Nathan lived in a brownstone on the corner of Franklin and Charles. 3 flights of narrow stairs, creaky and worn. He answered the door almost immediately. He saw their faces before they could speak, Joanne's tear-streaked cheeks, the way Thomas kept shifting his weight like he couldn't stand still, and his eyes sharpened. "What happened?" he asked. "Is Elise okay?" Joanne didn't answer. She just handed him the phone. Nathan's face changed as he scrolled. He'd seen abuse before. He was a lawyer, after all, but this was his sister. This was Elise, the girl he used to walk to school. The girl who once told him she wanted to open a bakery when she grew up. The girl who used to hum under her breath while sketching cupcake designs on napkins. The silence that followed was brief, controlled. He handed the phone back, his voice low and clear. "This ends now." He reached for his coat, his keys, his wallet. "I'm calling the police." He didn't ask for permission. He didn't wait to be talked down. He dialed the number like he'd done 100 times before. "Yes," he said. "I'd like to report a domestic violence case. Victim's name is Elise Granger. Suspect, Brandon Wolfe. Address, 2120 Ashland Court, apartment 3B. Every syllable was precise, professional, but there was fire in his tone, a fire he no longer intended to contain. He looked up at our parents. "I'm going to her," he said. "I need to make sure she's safe." Thomas opened his mouth, closed it again. He just nodded. Nathan was already halfway down the stairs before either of them could catch their breath. Back in my apartment, I was still standing by the window, staring out at the blurred lights of the city, unaware that somewhere in the distance, the storm had already begun to turn in my favor. The rain hadn't stopped. It painted the window in trembling lines, washing the outside world into a blur of lights and shadows. I stood there, one hand resting against the cool glass, my reflection fragmented by water. Brandon was behind me, somewhere on the couch, half asleep or half drunk or both, the TV murmuring nonsense into the air. He hadn't spoken in over 15 minutes. That was rare, but I didn't trust the silence. It never meant peace. Only pressure. Only the next explosion waiting in the dark. I should have felt relief that my parents had returned, and then left again without a fight. I should have told myself they didn't make it worse. But it didn't feel like mercy. It felt like confirmation that what I was enduring was invisible. I don't know how long I stood there, but when my phone buzzed in my back pocket, I jumped. My heart slammed into my ribs like it was trying to escape. I glanced over my shoulder. Brandon didn't move. I stepped into the hallway, shielding the light with my body as I looked at the screen. Unknown number. I hesitated. My thumb hovered over the screen. Then I picked up. "Elise," said a voice, calm, steady, unmistakable. "It's Nathan." I couldn't speak right away. My throat closed like it had forgotten how. "Nathan." I whispered. "Mom and Dad came to me," he said, his words fast but clear. "They showed me everything. The pictures. Your face. Your arms." I turned slightly, still facing the window. My voice was barely a breath. "They told you." "They didn't need to," he replied. "The photos said enough." He exhaled, sharp and decisive. "I've called the police. Officers are on the way to your apartment now." The word police hit me like cold water. My knees nearly gave out. I pressed my back to the wall for support. "Wait, Nathan, I didn't ask for that. You didn't have to," he said, firm. "It's the right thing, Elise." "No." My voice cracked. "You don't understand. He said if I ever told anyone, if I ever involved the police." Nathan cut me off gently, but with a force I hadn't heard from him in years. "I do understand. But I also know that every hour you stay, there is another hour you're gambling with your life." Tears welled up again. I pressed a palm to my cheek, to the tender, pulsing skin under my eye. "I can't." "Yes, you can," he said. Then his voice softened. "Elise, are you ready to get out of this?" It wasn't the words themselves that undid me. It was the way he said them. Without pity, without pressure. Just a hand extended in the dark. I closed my eyes. I could still hear Brandon breathing in the other room. Still smell the beer. Still feel the ghosts of every bruise, every insult. Every time he called me nothing. No one else had ever offered a way out. Not like this. Not this clear. Not this final. "Yes," I whispered. The word came out shaky, but it didn't falter. "I'm ready." There was a pause on the line. Then, "Good. I'll be there soon. Wait for me. Don't open the door unless it's the police, all right?" I nodded, even though he couldn't see. "Okay." "You're not alone anymore," Nathan said. "Whatever happens next, we'll face it together." I hung up and stared at the phone in my hand, the screen now dark. My breathing came in uneven waves, but I wasn't drowning in fear this time. Something else was rising in me. A current I hadn't felt in years. Brandon shifted on the couch. I heard the clink of the beer bottle hitting the coffee table. "Who are you talking to?" he called out lazily, suspicion sliding into his voice. I didn't answer. I slipped the phone into my pocket and turned back toward the bedroom. My hands moved with strange steadiness. I walked to the closet and reached for the small black suitcase on the top shelf. The one I hadn't touched in years. It had dust on the handle. I opened it slowly, quietly. Clothes. A few dresses. A sweater my mom gave me before I moved in with him. A framed photo of me and Nathan at the lake when we were kids. And tucked in the corner, half forgotten, a stuffed rabbit with one ear nearly falling off. From a time when I believed the world would be kind. I placed each item carefully, not because I planned to run tonight, but because I needed to remember I could. In the living room, Brandon muttered something I couldn't make out. Then the remote clicked again, and the TV volume rose. He was pretending everything was normal, that nothing had changed. But it had, and soon he'd know. It started with the sound of a car door slamming outside. Sharp, decisive, then footsteps on the stairs, more than one pair. I was standing by the hallway, suitcase zipped and set neatly by the front door. My hands were trembling, but my spine felt strangely straight. For once, I wasn't moving like prey. I wasn't hiding in corners. I was waiting. Brandon was still in the living room, legs up, beer balanced against his stomach, flipping through channels with the remote like a man completely secure in his throne. He didn't notice me watching him, or maybe he just didn't care. When the knock came, it wasn't tentative. It was 2 quick raps, firm, followed by a deeper thud, the kind that meant official business. Brandon stiffened. His eyes flicked toward the door, then toward me. "Who the hell is that?" he snapped. I said nothing. He stood up, the beer sloshing over his hand. "Elise? Did you?" But before he could finish, the door swung open. Nathan was the first one in. Behind him, 2 uniformed officers stepped into the apartment, their expressions unreadable but purposeful. One of them was holding a clipboard. The other rested a hand lightly near his holster, not threatening, just ready. Thomas stood just outside in the hallway, face ashen, eyes sunken like he hadn't slept in days. I stood to the side, not moving, not speaking, my back against the wall and a folder clutched tightly in both hands. It was everything. The photos, the doctor's reports, a timeline of bruises and breaks, the evidence no one could look away from anymore. Brandon scoffed, his voice rising with false bravado. "What the hell is this? You bringing your brother over to play cop?" Nathan didn't flinch. His tone was low, but ironclad. "Brandon Wolfe," he said clearly. "You're being detained for suspected domestic assault against Elise Granger." Brandon's face twisted. "You can't be serious. This is insane. I didn't touch her." His eyes snapped to me. "Elise, tell them it was an accident, that you fell, right? You always say that." I didn't speak. I simply stepped forward and handed the folder to Nathan, who passed it to the officer without a word. The officer flipped it open, scanned the first few pages, and his mouth tightened. The other officer took out his notepad. Brandon took a step toward me, his voice rising. "Elise, come on. Don't do this. Don't throw everything away over one bad night." Nathan stepped between us. "Stay away from her," he warned. Brandon sneered. "You think I'm scared of you?" "You don't have to be," Nathan said, "but you will respect the law." The room was spinning now, but not in the way it used to. It wasn't panic, it was release. Years of silence cracking open, like a dam finally breaking. "You're all out of your minds," Brandon yelled. "You've got no proof. This is all her word. She's lying." The officer lifted the folder. Photographs, medical records, testimonies from witnesses. "It's all here. If you have anything else to say, you can do so at the station." Brandon lunged again, pure rage boiling to the surface. But the second officer moved fast, locking one arm behind his back. "Don't resist," the officer said. "It'll only make things worse." Brandon thrashed once, twice, his voice cracking. "You'll regret this. I've got connections. I'll ruin all of you." But no one flinched. My father stepped slowly into the apartment, his eyes never lifting to meet mine. He looked like a man walking through ash, as if every item Brandon had touched in that space now burned his skin. He didn't say a word, only watched as they secured Brandon's wrists, read him his rights, and guided him out. Brandon turned once more in the doorway, eyes burning with hate. "Elise, you'll come crawling back. You don't have anyone but me." I didn't blink. I didn't move. I simply stood there as they walked him out, and with each step he took down that hallway, I felt something loosen in my chest. A chain gone, a weight lifted, a version of myself I no longer owed anything to. Nathan turned to me once they were gone. "You okay?" I couldn't speak, but I nodded. "We're not done yet," he said gently. "You'll need to go to the hospital. Get the injuries documented properly. Mom will go with you." Behind him, Joanne stepped forward, slowly at first, as if unsure I'd let her near. Then she wrapped her arms around me tightly, fiercely, and whispered, "It's going to be okay, sweetheart. I promise." I stood still in her embrace, and for the first time in years I believed her. The taxi ride to the hospital felt like a dream wrapped in fog. My mother sat beside me in the back seat, holding my hand like it was the only thing anchoring her to the present. She didn't speak much, and neither did I. The city blurred past the windows, wet streets, red lights glowing through the drizzle. The occasional pedestrian hunched under a broken umbrella. I watched it all in silence, but inside, I was shifting. At Strong Memorial, a nurse led us into a small room with white walls and soft fluorescent lighting. The doctor was kind, measured. He took his time, documenting each bruise, each scratch, each shadow of injury along my body. I sat still, letting him work. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. Joanne stayed by my side the entire time, her grip never loosening. I could feel the shame radiating off her. Years of denial of inaction, all compressed into that one chair beside the exam table. When we were done, they gave me a folder, my own copy of the truth. Not a story, not a suspicion, evidence. Back at the apartment, Nathan was already working at the kitchen table. Legal documents spread across the surface like maps of a battlefield. He was filling out a restraining order request, typing with practiced speed and frightening clarity. My father sat across from him, sipping tea with both hands wrapped around the cup. His fingers were shaking. He didn't speak much, either. I stepped into the room, and the atmosphere shifted. Nathan looked up, and for the first time since I was a child, I saw something in his face I hadn't seen in years: admiration. He pushed the papers aside. "How are you holding up?" I wanted to say I was fine, that I felt strong, but all I could offer was a quiet, "Okay." It was the truth. Not perfect, not whole, but okay, and that was enough. He nodded and leaned back. "It feels unreal, doesn't it?" I smiled faintly, then looked away, like I'm watching someone else's life from the outside. "No," he said gently but firmly. "This is your life, the one you're finally taking back." I walked into my room and closed the door behind me. My suitcase was still there by the wall, unopened since we left. But something in the room had changed. It didn't smell like fear anymore. The air felt different, lighter. I sat on the bed, running my fingers over the worn fabric of the plush rabbit I'd packed earlier. It was a silly thing, maybe, but it reminded me of who I was before all of this. Before Brandon. Before silence became survival. In the hallway, I could hear my father moving. Quiet steps. Purposeful. I opened the door slightly and peeked out. He was walking back and forth from the bedroom, carrying black trash bags filled with Brandon's things, one at a time without a word. He didn't ask where to put them. He didn't comment. Each trip was a quiet act of apology, of atonement. A father, finally, trying to protect the daughter he had once failed. Joanne stood at the sink, rinsing out the teacups no one had drunk earlier. Her movements were steadier now. No trembling, no hesitations. She placed the cups upside down on the towel, then reached for the kettle again. But this time, it wasn't out of nervousness. She wasn't trying to soothe anyone. She was just making tea, like a mother in a home that was finally safe again. Later that night, we all sat together at the kitchen table. No TV, no yelling, no pretending, just quiet, but not the kind of silence that used to haunt me the kind that meant people were walking on eggshells or holding their breath. This silence was different. It was full of space, of possibility. Joanne reached across and brushed a loose strand of hair from my face. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I knew he was hurting you. I thought if we ignored it, it might go away. I thought speaking up would only make it worse." "I understand," I said softly, "but it's over now. We're going to live differently. I won't go back to silence. Not again." She nodded. "Neither will I." Nathan slid the restraining order papers across the table toward me. "It's filed. He won't be coming near you again. You have my word." My eyes met his. I didn't thank him, not with words. Just a long look, filled with something that had no name yet. A kind of peace that was still fragile, but real. Later, I lay in bed, listening to the wind outside. The apartment was quiet, peaceful. The kind of quiet that used to feel dangerous, now felt like a lullaby. My body still ached, and my heart still carried bruises no doctor could diagnose. But I felt something new in my chest. Breath. For the first time in years, I exhaled without fear. The weight was still there, but it was no longer pressing me into the ground. I was lighter. I was free. Brandon once told me no one would ever come for me, that I was alone. He was wrong. Someone did come for me. Nathan, my parents, myself. And now, I'm never going back.